On the distant world of Targon 6, a small human colony of just a few thousand souls thrived under the light of a binary star system. Life was simple yet fulfilling for the settlers who had chosen this planet to start anew. Their days were filled with work and community, and their nights were marked by the quiet hum of a peaceful existence. They were the first wave of humanity to venture beyond the borders of Earth into the vast unknown of space, but none of them knew that their lives were about to change forever. The Orcs arrived without warning, their massive ships descending from the void above like predatory birds, descending upon unsuspecting prey. The first blast tore through the colony's defense shields with an intensity that shattered the calm of the planet. In an instant, a series of explosions rocked the surface as the invaders landed in a perfect storm of fire and smoke. The humans on Targon 6 never stood a chance. The Orcs' weapons were unlike anything they had ever seen. They wielded technology far beyond the humans' own abilities. They were precise and efficient, their insectoid forms moving with terrifying speed and coordination. In a matter of hours, 12 colonists lay dead, their bodies scattered across the colony as the Orcs swept through the settlement with ruthless efficiency. The surviving humans had no time to organize a defense. Those who tried to fight back were quickly overwhelmed. The invaders showed no mercy as they tore apart homes and infrastructure with deadly force. Only a few managed to escape into the wilderness with little hope of surviving. The destruction was complete in the span of mere hours. The once thriving colony was now a smoldering ruin. The Orcs did not care about the humans they had killed, only that the planet was now theirs for the taking. But something unexpected happened as the Orcs looked upon their work. Something stirred in the hearts of the surviving humans, something deep within the core of their being that no alien force had ever encountered before. Back on Earth, the news of the attack spread like wildfire across the globe. The first reports were fragmented and unclear, but as more data was recovered and transmissions intercepted, the true horror of the event became clear. 12 humans had been murdered in cold blood by a race of aliens who showed no remorse or hesitation. Their actions were brutal and swift, and yet their reasons were unknown. No demands had been made, no war had been declared. It was as though the Orcs attacked simply for the sake of asserting their dominance. The world paused for a moment in shock and disbelief as governments and military leaders struggled to process the information. How could this happen? Why would they attack a peaceful colony like this? And why such savagery against such a small group of people? But then something else began to happen. Beneath the surface of fear and confusion, a deep well of anger started to rise. Humanity had seen conflict before, but this was different. This was personal. 12 lives had been taken for no reason at all, and that would never be forgotten. And so the seed of revenge was planted. It began in small gatherings of angry citizens, calling for action in the streets. It spread to the halls of governments and the war rooms of military leaders who had long since been weary of peace and diplomacy. As whispers of the alien attack reached the ears of humanity's leaders, they knew one thing for certain: they would not allow this to go unanswered, not by a long shot. The death of 12 humans would become a rallying cry across Earth, a turning point that would unite the planet in a way no one had ever thought possible. And in the hearts of every person who heard the news, something stirred too, not just fear, not just anger, but something deeper and more dangerous: hope. For the first time in history, humanity would stand united against an enemy from the stars. The world had been shaken by the attack on Targon 6, and humanity was now facing a moment of reckoning. There was no turning back. The news spread from city to city across every continent, and the once divided nations of Earth began to feel the weight of the tragedy. The loss of 12 colonists had ignited a fire in every heart. The desire for vengeance burned bright, and it was clear that the world's leaders had no choice but to act swiftly and decisively. At first, the response was chaotic. Governments were scrambling to make sense of the situation. The sheer audacity of the Orc assault had caught everyone off guard. Diplomats called for peace negotiations. Military experts proposed defensive measures, and strategists debated what was even possible against such a technologically superior force. But none of it mattered. Not now. The people were beyond talking. They wanted action, and fast. In a matter of days, a global summit was called, and representatives from every major nation gathered in a secure location to discuss the fate of humanity. This would not be the usual summit where tensions were carefully negotiated and diplomatic language was used. This time the atmosphere was charged with raw emotion. The room was filled with anger, frustration, and most of all a fierce resolve that could not be ignored. The idea of appeasing the Jureks was quickly dismissed by nearly every delegate. The humans of Earth had been insulted, their brothers and sisters had been murdered for no reason, and the world would not stand by. In those early hours, as discussions grew heated and tempers flared, one voice rose above the rest, the voice of General Evelyn Drake, a woman who had led Earth's unified military forces for years. She had seen conflict before, but this was different. This was personal. She stood before the room, her eyes burning with the intensity of someone who had just witnessed the slaughter of their own people, and she said the words that would shift the tide of history. "We will fight them. We will unite every resource we have, and we will take the fight to them." Her voice echoed through the chamber, and for the first time in the debate, everyone went silent. The human military had been fragmented for years, with nations operating separately and often in opposition to one another. But now, under the threat of an alien invasion, all of that changed. The summit forged a new alliance, a global coalition, with one mission: to take back what was lost, and to ensure that humanity's resolve would not be broken. The leaders agreed to share technology and resources at an unprecedented scale, and they began to mobilize their forces. Earth's top scientists and engineers were called upon to provide every weapon, every defense, every advantage they could bring to bear against the Jureks. Within days, humanity had begun to build a fleet of warships and advanced defense systems, combining technologies from all corners of the planet. With unprecedented speed, they created new weapons using hybrid technologies that had been under development for years, but never before put into practice. Human ingenuity, it seemed, was unmatched when faced with an existential threat. Across the globe, humanity was ready to do what no one had ever thought possible. They would strike back, not as separate nations, not as isolated groups, but as a unified species ready to show the universe that humanity could stand tall when the time came to fight. In the streets, ordinary people joined the cause. Volunteers enlisted in the military, engineers, doctors, and builders all pitched in to support the war effort. Factories that once produced consumer goods now churned out weaponry, armor, and supplies. The fight for survival was not just for the military, it was for all of humanity. By the end of the week, the first joint military task force was assembled, and humanity's response was clear. They were coming for the Jureks, and they would not rest until they made them pay for the lives they had taken. The Earth had united, and nothing, not even the most advanced alien empire, could stand in their way now. As the human alliance solidified, and its military machine began to mobilize, the Jureks were oblivious to the storm brewing in the depths of space. The insectoid empire, long accustomed to unchallenged dominance, had no reason to fear Earth. Their fleets were vast, their technology far superior to anything humanity had ever conceived, and their history of conquest left no doubt that their reign was unbreakable. To them, the slaughter of a dozen humans was nothing more than a minor blemish on the pages of their expansion efforts, another victory to be added to their endless catalog of conquests. But the Jurek leadership, proud and arrogant, soon began to notice something they had not anticipated. The humans were not backing down. Reports began to trickle in from their scouts, and for the first time in their history, the Jurek commanders felt unease creeping into their minds. The humans weren't afraid. They weren't panicking. In fact, they were growing more coordinated, more unified, and more determined by the day. At first, the Jureks dismissed these early reports as a temporary surge in human morale, the kind that often followed a tragedy or a rallying cry. Their arrogance led them to believe that the humans would crumble under the weight of their own inexperience in intergalactic warfare. Yet as the weeks passed, the signs became undeniable. Earth was not just responding, it was adapting. The Alliance had mobilized faster than any intelligence could have predicted, and new technologies were appearing from every corner of the globe. Weaponry, ships, and defenses were evolving at a rapid pace, and the Jurek's once unshakable confidence began to erode. At the highest levels of Jurek command, Panic began to seep into the ranks. Zurich warships had been sent to Earth's orbit to establish dominance, but human resistance was fiercer than expected. The humans had not only constructed formidable ships, but had also managed to adapt their technology with an ingenuity that baffled the alien forces. The Zurichs, who had relied on overwhelming force to subjugate weaker species, were now facing a species that learned from each encounter, evolved its strategies, and refused to yield. In one of the first significant skirmishes, human forces launched an ambush on a Zurich battalion, stationed on a moon just beyond Earth's reach. The humans, using stealth tactics and new adaptive cloaking technology, struck without warning, inflicting heavy losses. Zurich warships, designed to combat entire fleets, found themselves vulnerable to human ingenuity. The battle turned in humanity's favor not by sheer numbers but by their ability to innovate on the fly, using Zurich weaknesses against them. What had once been considered impossible was now within humanity's grasp. Zurich commanders tried to remain calm, but could not ignore the mounting pressure. The humans were relentless, and the sheer scale of their technological advancements was terrifying. The Zurichs had underestimated their enemy, assuming that because they were more advanced, they were untouchable. Now, it seemed that Earth's adaptability and resilience were the true edge they had overlooked. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the Global Alliance celebrated small victories, but they knew this was just the beginning. Each success, each battle won, fueled their determination to keep going. The people of Earth were united in a way that no one had ever imagined, a unity born from the ashes of their grief. What began as an act of pure rage had transformed into something far more powerful, a collective will to protect their future and the legacy of the 12 lives lost on Targon 6. Every day, humanity drew closer to their ultimate goal, not just to defend their world, but to bring justice to the stars. For the Zurichs, the realization came too late. The confidence they had once taken for granted had shattered like glass, and now they would have to face the true strength of humanity, a force they had never anticipated and could not escape. The first significant strike against the Zurich Empire came faster than anyone had anticipated. Humanity, under the guidance of their united military forces, had spent weeks preparing their retaliation, strategizing, building, and training. The war was no longer just a defensive action. It had evolved into an all-out offensive. Earth's combined fleet, now equipped with advanced hybrid technologies, was ready to launch its first full-scale attack on Zurich forces beyond their homeworld. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore. The 12 lost lives on Targon 6 had become a symbol, a spark that ignited the fire within every human across the globe. The people weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something deeper, a shared belief that humanity had the right to exist in peace, free from the threat of alien domination. The target for this initial strike was a Zurich supply station located on a desolate moon in the outer reaches of the galaxy. The station was responsible for funneling resources and reinforcements into Zurich forces operating on the fringes of their empire. Earth's planners knew that crippling this supply chain would slow the Zurich war machine considerably, but the operation was risky. The station was well defended, and the Zurichs had yet to fully comprehend the depths of human ingenuity. General Evelyn Drake, the architect of Earth's military strategy, stood at the helm of the mission. She knew this would be a pivotal moment. If they succeeded, it would send a powerful message to the Zurichs that humanity wasn't just a colony of vulnerable settlers. They were a species with a fierce will, capable of striking back with precision and force. She could feel the weight of her decisions. Every life aboard the mission was hers to command. But she was resolute. This was more than a battle. It was the beginning of humanity's reclamation. As Earth's fleet entered the outer rim of Zurich space, tension hung in the air. The human ships, designed for speed and stealth, were equipped with cloaking technology that allowed them to move unnoticed by enemy sensors. The Zurich defense systems were sophisticated, but they were designed to deal with predictable threats, not the kind of unorthodox tactics humanity had quickly developed. At the designated moment, the fleet emerged from the shadows of nearby asteroids and launched a sudden, well-coordinated strike. The Zurich station, still in the process of receiving reinforcements, was caught completely off guard. The humans targeted the station's weak points, supply depots, power cores, and communications hubs with surgical precision. Zurich forces scrambled to respond, but their reaction was slow. The humans had already anticipated their moves, using decoy signals to confuse enemy sensors and misdirect their fire. The Zurich defense forces were shattered in the opening moments of the assault. Human bombers, with pinpoint accuracy, crippled the station's ability to function, while specialized ground forces moved in to disable the station's core systems. Zurich ships attempted to defend, but they were no match for the human technology, which had adapted rapidly to counteract their superior firepower. The station's destruction was swift. Within hours, it was reduced to a smoldering wreck, sending debris and radiation scattering across the moon's surface. It was a resounding victory, but it was also a statement. The Zurichs could no longer rely on their size and strength alone. Humanity had discovered their vulnerabilities, and for the first time, the tables had turned. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. People cheered in the streets, and for the first time since the tragedy of Targon 6, humanity felt a glimmer of hope. The victory wasn't just a military success, it was a psychological blow to the Zurichs. Their once unassailable dominance had been challenged, and humanity had proven that they could strike back with force. But this was only the beginning. Earth's leaders, General Drake among them, knew the Zurich Empire would not take this blow lying down. The battle lines had been drawn, and both sides were on the verge of a war unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The first blow had been struck, but the true test of humanity's resolve was still ahead. The Zurichs would not give up easily. And now, humanity would have to rise to meet them. The success of the first strike sent shockwaves through the Zurich Empire, but humanity was far from satisfied. A single victory, though significant, would not be enough to deter the alien invaders from pursuing their brutal campaign. For the first time, Earth had tasted the sweet victory of defiance. But now it was time to turn that taste into a strategic advantage. The human alliance knew that the Zurichs wouldn't back down. They would only escalate their efforts. Therefore, humanity's retaliation would not be just a series of isolated skirmishes. It would be a strategy of systematic and total war. General Evelyn Drake, who had orchestrated the initial assault, now found herself at the helm of a larger campaign, one that would span entire star systems. Earth's unified military command, now stronger than ever, began to adapt to the fast-paced changes in technology and tactics that had given them their first victory. A new type of warfare was emerging, one that relied not just on raw power, but on strategic brilliance, innovation, and an unwavering will to survive. The first part of the strategy was to disrupt the Zurich supply lines. The destruction of the Zurich supply station had proven effective, but it was only a small taste of the damage Earth could do. With their newly acquired intelligence on Zurich routes and resource centers, humanity began launching precision strikes against Zurich convoys, supply depots, and even resource-rich planets in their vast empire. Every successful mission chipped away at the foundation of the Zurich war effort. Every destroyed facility sent a ripple of doubt through the alien forces. Were they truly as invincible as they had once believed? But humanity's strategy was far from limited to small-scale raids. Earth's engineers and scientists had worked tirelessly to develop advanced weaponry that could strike at the very heart of Zurich power. A new class of warship, outfitted with experimental energy weapons and shield-breaking technology, was rolled out for the first time. These ships could engage Zurich warships on equal footing and even overpower them in direct confrontations. More importantly, the humans had mastered the art of surprise. Zurich commanders, once certain of their superiority, now found themselves vulnerable to ambushes and traps set by Earth's fleet. The humans didn't rely solely on military tactics either. They understood the importance of psychological warfare. As humanity's victories mounted, the human media, which had once been focused solely on the pain and loss of Targon 6, began broadcasting propaganda that painted the Jureks not as a terrifying enemy, but as the arrogant, destructive invaders they truly were. The stories of the 12 colonists, of the brutal murders and the relentless assault, became a symbol for every human who had suffered, every family that had lost someone, every soldier who had enlisted to fight. The Jureks were no longer an abstract threat. They were personal enemies to every human on Earth. Meanwhile, as Earth's forces struck at the Jureks' infrastructure, General Drake made a bold decision. Rather than simply defend their own homeworld, humanity would take the war directly to the Jureks. The decision to attack Jurek-held colonies and even their homeworld was a risky one. Humanity had no guarantees that they would succeed. But it was a calculated risk. Earth had learned enough about the Jureks' weaknesses that a direct assault, aimed at their heart, could break their spirit. And if the Jureks' resolve faltered, they might crumble from within. The first human fleet to invade Jurek-controlled space was a sight to behold. Over 300 ships, a blend of new technologies and powerful weaponry, moved through the darkness of space as a unified force. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer a collection of scattered colonies. It was a united and formidable power, capable of striking fear into the hearts of even the most advanced alien empires. The humans were not simply fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for vengeance. The 12 lives lost on Targon 6 were now the foundation upon which this strategy was built, and each blow struck against the Jureks was an act of retribution. Every strike, every victory, sent a ripple of fear through the alien empire, shaking its very foundations. They had come to Earth expecting easy conquest, but now they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered. A species that would not be broken. A species that would not rest until their enemies were made to pay for the blood they had spilled. Humanity had become a force to be reckoned with, and the Jureks were starting to realize it far too late. The Jurek Empire, once the towering colossus of the galaxy, began to tremble under the relentless assault from humanity. What had started as a small-scale retaliation against the murder of 12 colonists on Targon 6 had transformed into a full-scale war that threatened the very foundation of the Jureks' dominance. As the months passed, the cracks in their seemingly invincible empire deepened, and their once mighty war machine began to unravel. The turning point came when Earth's forces, using intelligence gathered from previous raids and infiltrations, launched a series of coordinated strikes on the Jureks' key industrial worlds. These planets, essential to the production of the aliens' military technology and resources, had been fortified for centuries, thought to be impenetrable. But humanity's innovations had made them vulnerable. The hybrid weaponry developed by Earth's scientists, capable of bypassing Jurek defenses, was used with deadly precision. Factory after factory fell, production lines were disrupted, and entire cities were reduced to rubble. The Jurek leadership, caught off guard by the sheer scale of the assault, found themselves in a desperate scramble to defend their empire. They had expected resistance, of course, but not this. This was no simple rebellion. It was a war of attrition. The humans were relentless, adapting faster than the Jureks could repair the damage, using every weakness the aliens had ever displayed against them. Jurek commanders, who had once ruled with supreme confidence, now found themselves plagued by doubt. Their fleets, though still vast, were beginning to show signs of wear. Human tactics, once dismissed as crude and uncoordinated, had evolved into a strategic genius that overwhelmed their alien adversaries. The once formidable Jurek warships, designed for sheer dominance, were now being outmaneuvered by human vessels with superior agility and advanced countermeasures. What had once seemed like a one-sided war was rapidly turning into a battle of survival for the Jureks. In a crucial battle above the Jureks' second-largest moon, humanity struck a blow that would echo throughout the galaxy. The operation, codenamed Eclipse, targeted a fleet of Jurek warships that had been dispatched to defend their inner systems. Using a combination of stealth technology and brilliant tactical planning, Earth's forces infiltrated the heart of the Zurich fleet. The humans deployed electromagnetic pulses that temporarily disabled the Zurich's power grids, leaving their warships vulnerable to a concentrated strike. The resulting explosion left dozens of Zurich ships floating dead in space, their hulls breached and their crews lost. The shockwaves from this battle reverberated throughout the entire empire. Zurich officials, once confident in their dominance, now found themselves fighting a war on multiple fronts. Entire sectors of their empire were cut off from reinforcements, and the Zurich's ability to wage war was steadily crippled by the loss of their industrial base and military strength. Earth's unity, once a novelty to the Zurichs, had now become the single greatest threat to their entire existence. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the victory at Eclipse was hailed as a turning point, but it was also a grim reminder of the cost of war. The toll on both sides had been catastrophic, and while the human spirit burned brighter with each victory, the faces of the fallen, the colonists, the soldiers, and the civilians remained etched in the minds of every person on Earth. The 12 lives lost on Targon 6 were now more than just a rallying cry. They had become a symbol of everything humanity had lost and everything they would fight to protect. The Zurich Empire, unable to repair the damage and unwilling to accept defeat, began to fracture. Their once unified leadership struggled to maintain control as infighting erupted among various factions. The once unstoppable force had become a disjointed collection of desperate leaders clinging to power in the face of total collapse. But the humans, for all their victories, knew that the end was not yet in sight. The Zurichs were wounded, but they were still dangerous. The final battle was yet to come, and humanity had no illusions about the scale of the challenge ahead. But with every victory, with every inch gained, they knew they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting to ensure that no one, ever again, could take their home, their families, or their future. The Zurich Empire was crumbling, but its leaders still had one last card to play, and humanity would be ready for whatever came next. The Zurich Empire, once an unstoppable force, was now crumbling at the edges. Yet the true nature of the alien threat was still far from extinguished. Desperate to avoid total annihilation, the remnants of the Zurich leadership convened in secrecy, plotting their final gambit. The aliens, having lost vast swaths of territory and military might, realized that if they were to survive, they would need to unleash their ultimate weapon, a weapon that had remained hidden in the deepest vaults of their empire for centuries. This weapon, a massive star-destroying device, was capable of wiping out entire planets with the flick of a switch. The Zurichs had designed it in the early days of their empire, a contingency for any race that dared to challenge their dominance. However, for all its terrifying power, the weapon had never been used. Its mere existence was known only to the highest echelons of Zurich command, and its deployment had been reserved for the most dire of circumstances. Now, that moment had arrived. As the final remnants of their fleet regrouped in the vast reaches of space, the Zurichs secretly activated the device, setting course for Earth's solar system. Their intent was clear. If they couldn't conquer humanity, they would obliterate them entirely. The Zurichs had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, on Earth, General Evelyn Drake and the military command had been monitoring the Zurich fleet's movements, growing increasingly concerned as their intel indicated a major shift in Zurich tactics. Earth's forces were preparing for another major assault when they intercepted an encrypted message from deep within Zurich space. It was a distress signal, but not from a single ship. It was a distress signal from the Zurich High Command, announcing the activation of the star-destroying weapon and the fleet's course to Earth. Drake's heart sank as she realized the full scope of what the Zurichs were about to unleash. The humans had been striking at the heart of the Zurich Empire, dismantling it piece by piece. But this weapon, if deployed, could undo everything they had fought for. Earth, despite all its victories, was still vulnerable. The response was immediate. Every available resource, every ship, every fighter, and every soldier were mobilized for one final push. But this wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about saving their world. Humanity had no choice but to go on the offensive. Earth's military planners scrambled to devise a strategy to stop the Zurich weapon before it could reach their planet. General Drake, with her sharp mind and unbreakable resolve, understood that they had one chance to succeed. They could not match the Zurich weapon's power directly, but they could outsmart it. Humanity's fleet, now more advanced and battle-hardened than ever, would strike at the heart of the Zurich armada, not with brute force, but with cunning and precision. They needed to stop the weapon from firing, whatever the cost. The fleet set out in a daring operation known as the Last Stand. They would intercept the Zurich fleet and disable the weapon before it could reach Earth. The mission was dangerous, even suicidal. The weapon's defenses were formidable, and the Zurichs would not hesitate to defend their final hope with everything they had. But humanity had learned the true nature of war. They weren't fighting just to survive anymore. They were fighting to ensure that no one would ever threaten their future again. As the battle raged in the cold void of space, Earth's forces, though vastly outnumbered, showed a resilience the Zurichs had never encountered before. Their tactics were unconventional, unpredictable, and far more effective than anyone could have anticipated. Every Zurich ship that fell, every piece of the armada that was torn apart, was a testament to humanity's unyielding will. But the clock was ticking. The Zurich weapon was getting closer to its target. The last battle was reaching its apex. General Drake's heart raced as she led the final charge, knowing that this would be the defining moment of the war, the moment that would determine whether humanity's dream of survival would become a reality, or whether Earth would fall to the might of an alien empire determined to erase it. The battle was brutal, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The final gambit had begun, and only one side would emerge victorious. The final confrontation had begun, a battle that would define the fate of Earth and everything humanity had fought for. General Evelyn Drake, aboard the flagship Vanguard, watched as Earth's fleet closed in on the Zurich armada. The massive star-destroying weapon, a terrifying force of unimaginable destruction, was within striking distance of Earth's solar system. The Zurich forces, though diminished, were still formidable, their ships arrayed in a protective formation around the weapon. Humanity's forces were outnumbered, but they were driven by something the Zurichs had never understood: sheer will. Drake's heart raced as the battle raged in the void of space. She could see the Zurich ships falling, their once imposing hulls shattered by human ingenuity and relentless firepower. Earth's fleet had learned, adapted, and overcome. The days of helplessness were long gone, and the people of Earth had become a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Yet even with all the victories behind them, they knew the war wasn't over. The weapon had to be stopped, and the stakes had never been higher. The plan was simple but incredibly dangerous. A small fleet of elite human ships had been tasked with infiltrating the heart of the Zurich defense formation and disabling the star-destroying weapon. The Vanguard and its accompanying vessels would draw the bulk of the Zurich forces' fire, keeping them distracted long enough for the assault team to get in close. But even with their advanced stealth technology and adaptive tactics, the human fleet was fighting against the clock. Every moment that passed brought the Zurich weapon closer to firing, and Earth's chances of survival grew slimmer with each passing second. As the battle intensified, the tactical brilliance of General Drake came to the forefront. She had anticipated the Zurichs' movements, knowing their patterns, and had used their own arrogance against them. Earth's ships struck in unexpected ways, attacking the Zurichs' weaknesses, drawing them into traps, and turning their own weapons against them. The once proud Zurich fleet was now in disarray, their commanders confused by the human tactics they could no longer predict. But still, the weapon remained the ultimate threat. As the human fleet engaged the last pockets of Zurich resistance, Drake's forces closed in on the star-destroying device. The final push was imminent. Inside the heart of the Zurich armada, the assault team, A handful of human soldiers, pilots, and engineers launched their desperate attack. The Zurich weapon, a massive structure of gleaming metal and pulsing energy, loomed ahead. Its defenses were formidable, and the human forces knew that one mistake could spell disaster. The soldiers moved with precision, sabotaging the energy cores and disabling key systems. With every step they took, the Zurich weapon grew more vulnerable. And then, as if the universe itself had been holding its breath, it happened. A breach. The weapon's core, overloaded and damaged by the human assault, began to destabilize. The countdown to activation, which had once seemed like an inevitable death sentence for Earth, was suddenly interrupted. The weapon, instead of firing upon Earth, erupted in a spectacular chain reaction, exploding into a burst of energy that lit up the cosmos like a dying star. The shockwave from the explosion reverberated through the battlefield, scattering the remaining Zurich forces in every direction. The humans, having delivered the final blow, watched as the Zurich fleet faltered and fell apart. Their once great empire had been broken, its final weapon reduced to nothing but stardust. Humanity had done it. They had not only survived, but they had won. Back on Earth, the celebrations began immediately. The war was over. The Zurich Empire, once a fearsome invader that had sought to annihilate humanity, was no more. The people of Earth had risen from the depths of grief and loss to become a power that no alien empire could ignore. The 12 lives lost on Targon 6 had not only sparked the fire of revenge. They had forged a new era. General Evelyn Drake, standing in the command center of the vanguard, allowed herself a moment of relief. The cost had been high, but the victory was theirs. The Zurichs had underestimated humanity, and now they would never forget that lesson. The war was over, but a new challenge had begun. Humanity had earned its place in the stars, not as subjects, but as equals, and as Earth's fleets prepared to return home, ready to rebuild, the message was clear. No force, no empire, no alien invader would ever again threaten humanity's right to exist. The dawn of a new era had begun.